Inside Pelican Bay, America's most notorious Supermax prison. Imagine a place designed not just to confine, but to control every aspect of human existence. A place where inmates spend 22 to 23 hours a day in concrete cells, where silence is enforced, and the only view of the outside world is a patch of sky through a perforated steel screen. That place is Pelican Bay State Prison, California's most notorious Supermax facility. Pelican Bay has been called the end of the line for California's most dangerous and influential prisoners. From gang leaders orchestrating violence across the state, to solitary confinement units that sparked international outrage, Pelican Bay represents the harshest edge of America's prison system. But how did this prison come to exist? What really happens inside its walls? And why has it become one of the most controversial institutions in U.S. corrections? Today, we take you inside Pelican Bay. Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started. The birth of Pelican Bay. Pelican Bay State Prison opened in 1989 in Crescent City, California, a remote area near the Oregon border. California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR. The location wasn't chosen by accident. Lawmakers wanted the prison far away from major population centers, both to isolate dangerous inmates and to reduce the chances of escape. The facility was built with two very different sections: a general population, GP side, housing around 2,000 inmates, and the infamous Security Housing Unit, SHU, a Supermax block designed to hold nearly 1,000 inmates in solitary confinement. According to state documents, the SHU was built specifically to house the leaders of California's most powerful prison gangs: Nuestra Familia, NF, Mexican Mafia, La M, Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family, BGF. These organizations had been directing violence, drug trafficking, and extortion from within the prison system for decades. Pelican Bay's SHU was meant to cut them off from the outside world entirely. California Legislative Analysts Report 1990. Life in the SHU. Inside the SHU, conditions are extreme. Prisoners are locked in 8 by 10-foot windowless cells, often for decades at a time. The cells contain only a concrete bed, toilet, sink, and a fluorescent light. Time out of cell, 1 hour per day in a small concrete exercise yard known as a dog run. Inmates can only see the sky through a grated opening above. Contact with others, virtually none. Meals are delivered through slots in the door. Visiting is heavily restricted and non-contact only. Noise. The design keeps inmates from speaking to each other. Guards report that many sections of the SHU are eerily silent. According to a 1995 federal court ruling in Madrid versus Gomez, conditions inside Pelican Bay's SHU were described as harsh and, in some cases, amounted to cruel and unusual punishment for mentally ill prisoners. The court stopped short of dismantling the SHU but required reforms. U.S. District Court, Northern District of California, 1995. Amnesty International and the United Nations later criticized the prison for using prolonged solitary confinement, arguing that it violated international human rights standards. Amnesty International, 2012. UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, 2011. Control through isolation. Pelican Bay's design reflects a philosophy of control through isolation. State officials believed that by separating gang leaders from the general population, they could weaken the influence of prison gangs across California. But evidence shows the opposite often happened. According to investigative reports by the Los Angeles Times and court documents, many gang leaders continued to run operations from inside the SHU using coded letters, legal mail, or even messages passed through corrupt staff. Los Angeles Times, 2006. For example, the Mexican Mafia allegedly coordinated extortion rackets across Southern California neighborhoods while members were locked inside Pelican Bay. Leaders of the Nuestra Familia were documented ordering violent attacks in other prisons through kites, small notes smuggled between inmates. U.S. versus Nuestra Familia, 2001. This raised a troubling question. Did Pelican Bay's SHU actually reduce violence, or did it simply harden the gang's grip on California's prison system? The hunger strikes. By the 2000s, pressure against Pelican Bay's SHU reached a breaking point. In 2011, thousands of inmates across California launched coordinated hunger strikes to protest indefinite solitary confinement. According to the New York Times, 2011, the protests began inside Pelican Bay's SHU and quickly spread to other prisons statewide. At their peak, over 30,000 inmates refused meals, one of the largest prisoner protests in U.S. history. The strikers issued a list of 5 core demands. End indefinite SHU confinement based solely on gang validation. Provide opportunities for programs and rehabilitation. Allow regular contact with family through calls and photographs. Provide adequate food and health care. Abolish the policy of group punishment when one prisoner violates rules. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, initially downplayed the strike, insisting conditions were humane and necessary for security. But as protests grew, media coverage and international attention intensified. Human rights groups like Amnesty International compared Pelican Bay's solitary units to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. Amnesty International 2012. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture argued that solitary confinement beyond 15 days could constitute torture under international law, UN Report 2011. Ashker versus Governor of California. The hunger strikes culminated in a landmark lawsuit, Ashker versus Governor of California, filed in 2012 by inmates Todd Ashker and Danny Troxell. The case challenged the constitutionality of long-term solitary confinement at Pelican Bay. The plaintiffs had each spent over 2 decades in the SHU, held there not for disciplinary violations, but for alleged gang affiliation. They argued this practice amounted to indefinite punishment without due process. Center for Constitutional Rights, 2015. After years of litigation, a settlement was reached in 2015. Under the agreement, California ended the practice of indefinite SHU terms. Inmates would no longer be placed in solitary solely for gang affiliation. Thousands of SHU prisoners were reviewed, and many transferred back to general population. According to CDCR records, more than 1,500 inmates were released from long-term solitary housing in the first year following the settlement, CDCR 2016. This was hailed as one of the most significant prison reforms in California's history, though critics argued it came only after decades of psychological harm had already been inflicted. Pelican Bay's notorious inmates. Pelican Bay has held some of the most powerful and feared inmates in California's prison system. Many were high-ranking gang leaders who used their influence far beyond the prison walls. Arturo Castellanos, a reputed leader in the Mexican Mafia, Castellanos was one of the hunger strike organizers from within the SHU. Todd Ashker, a member of the Aryan Brotherhood and lead plaintiff in the Ashker lawsuit, who spent over 20 years in solitary. Luis Cuete Garcia, a Nuestra Familia member whose communications from the SHU allegedly ordered assaults throughout Northern California, U.S. versus Nuestra Familia, 2001. While most of Pelican Bay's inmates were not publicly named, investigative reports consistently described it as the nerve center of California prison gangs during the 1990s and 2000s. Los Angeles Times, 2006. Violence inside and beyond. Even with its isolation units, Pelican Bay could not fully contain violence. According to CDCR reports, stabbings, assaults on staff, and orchestrated gang hits still occurred. Prison officials admitted that gang leaders used coded letters and legal correspondence to send orders beyond prison walls. CDCR Annual Security Reports 2000s. A 2006 Los Angeles Times investigation revealed that the Mexican Mafia continued to control drug trafficking and extortion rackets across Southern California neighborhoods, even from inside Pelican Bay. Similarly, Nuestra Familia leaders ordered coordinated assaults in county jails and rival prisons. Los Angeles Times, 2006. The paradox was clear. Pelican Bay had been built to break gang control, but in some cases it only centralized it. Mental health crisis. One of the most disturbing aspects of Pelican Bay has been its impact on prisoners' mental health. In Madrid versus Gomez, 1995, the federal court found that conditions in the SHU press the outer bounds of what most humans can psychologically tolerate. The court ruled that housing mentally ill prisoners in long-term solitary was unconstitutional. U.S. District Court, Northern District of California, 1995. Psychologists documented cases of hallucinations and paranoia, self-mutilation and suicide attempts, severe depression caused by years without meaningful human contact. The American Psychiatric Association and Human Rights Watch both criticized California for failing to adequately address the mental health consequences of prolonged isolation. While reforms since 2015 have reduced the number of long-term SHU prisoners, mental health care in Pelican Bay remains a point of scrutiny in official oversight reports. Office of Inspector General, California, 2020. Reforms after 2015. The Ashker settlement in 2015 marked a turning point. For decades, inmates could be confined in Pelican Bay's SHU indefinitely, sometimes for 20 to 30 years, based not on crimes committed inside, but on alleged gang affiliation. After the settlement, CDCR was required to review SHU placements. Thousands of prisoners who had been in solitary for years were transferred back to general population or step-down programs designed to monitor behavior before release. CDCR Report 2016. Reforms included time limits on solitary confinement terms, more rehabilitative programs, even for high-security inmates, step-down housing that allowed limited interaction and group activity. While prison officials insisted security was still paramount, critics argued these changes were long overdue. By 2017, according to reports from the Center for Constitutional Rights, the number of inmates in long-term solitary had dropped dramatically across California. CCR 2017. Pelican Bay today. As of 2020, Pelican Bay housed about 2,600 inmates. California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, 2020. The SHU still exists, but its role has shifted. Instead of indefinite terms, it's used for disciplinary segregation or short-term security concerns. The prison remains maximum security. Armed officers patrol its perimeters, and guard towers overlook every yard. Its location, near Crescent City, just miles from the Oregon border, continues to make it one of the most isolated prisons in the United States. Reports from oversight agencies highlight ongoing challenges. Staff shortages, a common issue in California prisons. Mental health care demands, especially for those released from years in solitary. Gang influence, which has not disappeared even with SHU reforms. Despite reforms, Pelican Bay still symbolizes California's end-of-the-line prison, the place where the system sends its most dangerous and influential inmates. Comparisons to other Supermax prisons. Pelican Bay is often compared to other U.S. Supermax prisons. ADX Florence, Colorado. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it houses federal inmates such as terrorists, cartel leaders, and notorious criminals. Like Pelican Bay, ADX confines prisoners 22 to 23 hours per day in concrete cells. Bureau of Prisons, 2019. Tams Correctional Center, Illinois. A Supermax closed in 2013 after lawsuits and public pressure over its use of solitary confinement. Conditions closely mirrored Pelican Bay's SHU, Chicago Tribune, 2012. Red Onion State Prison, Virginia. Frequently cited by Amnesty International for human rights concerns related to isolation practices. What makes Pelican Bay stand out is its sheer influence on prison policy nationwide. California's use of long-term solitary, and the subsequent reforms after 2015, have been studied by states across the country. The debate over solitary confinement. Pelican Bay sits at the heart of a larger debate. Should solitary confinement exist at all? Supporters argue it's necessary for controlling the worst of the worst. Prison officials note that without SHU-style housing, gang leaders could direct murders, riots, and extortion with ease. CDCR Security Reports 2000s. Opponents, including psychologists, human rights organizations, and former inmates, argue that prolonged solitary is psychological torture. Studies show even 15 days in near-total isolation can cause lasting trauma. American Journal of Psychiatry, 2014. In California, the Ashker settlement reduced SHU populations, but solitary confinement continues in modified forms. Across the U.S., reform efforts remain uneven. Some states have passed laws limiting solitary to a maximum of 15 days, while others still use it extensively. The question remains, was Pelican Bay's model an effective tool for prison control, or a failed experiment in human endurance? High-profile inmates and case studies. Pelican Bay's reputation has been shaped by the men it has held. Many were not household names, but within the prison system they carried enormous influence. Todd Ashker, an Aryan Brotherhood member and one of the lead plaintiffs in Ashker versus Governor of California. He spent over 2 decades in solitary confinement and became a central figure in exposing the harshness of Pelican Bay's SHU, Center for Constitutional Rights 2015. Arturo Castellanos, a reputed leader of the Mexican Mafia, Castellanos was described in court documents as continuing to exert control over gang operations while inside Pelican Bay, Los Angeles Times, 2006. Cornelio Tristan, linked to Nuestra Familia, his communications from the SHU were cited in federal indictments as proof that the gang's leadership structure thrived despite isolation, U.S. v. Nuestra Familia, 2001. These men represented a paradox. They were placed in Pelican Bay to stop their influence, yet the evidence shows many continued to shape California's prison underworld from behind those walls. Family perspectives. While Pelican Bay is designed to isolate inmates, the ripple effects reach far beyond the prison. Families often travel hundreds of miles to Crescent City for non-contact visits, separated by glass, communicating through phones. According to testimonies collected during the 2011-2015 hunger strikes, families described years without physical touch. Children grew up knowing their fathers only as voices through a handset. New York Times, 2013. Some mothers and wives became activists, forming groups such as California Families Against Solitary Confinement, which played a critical role in bringing media attention to the SHU hunger strikes. Los Angeles Times, 2011. For many, the hardest part was the indefiniteness, not knowing when, if ever, their loved ones would be released from solitary. Media coverage and cultural impact. Pelican Bay has been the subject of documentaries, news investigations, and countless reports by human rights organizations. The PBS Frontline documentary Solitary Nation, 2014, included interviews with inmates, although much of its focus was outside California. Pelican Bay was consistently referenced as a model for extreme isolation. The Los Angeles Times ran multiple investigations into gang activity at Pelican Bay, revealing how coded messages and corrupt staff allowed communication beyond the SHU. Los Angeles Times, 2006. The New York Times covered the 2011 hunger strikes extensively, describing Pelican Bay as the epicenter of one of the largest prison protests in U.S. history. New York Times, 2011. In popular culture, Pelican Bay has often been portrayed as a symbol of ultimate punishment, referenced in rap lyrics, crime novels, and even Hollywood scripts. But beyond the headlines, it became shorthand for America's larger debate over solitary confinement. The future of Pelican Bay. As California faces ongoing debates about prison reform, Pelican Bay's role remains uncertain. Declining SHU population. Since the Ashker settlement, the number of long-term solitary inmates has plummeted. By 2019, CDCR reported that fewer than 200 inmates statewide were in SHU-type confinement. CDCR, 2019. Budgetary concerns. Pelican Bay is expensive to operate, in part because of its remote location and security needs. Some lawmakers have questioned whether Supermax-style facilities are sustainable. Continued oversight. The California Office of the Inspector General continues to audit conditions, particularly around mental health and gang management. OIG reports, 2020. Still, Pelican Bay remains open. For CDCR, it is still considered the most secure option for housing inmates deemed a high risk to staff and other prisoners. The future of Pelican Bay may depend on California's broader prison policies, whether the state continues to rely on isolation as a tool of control, or whether new reforms push it toward rehabilitation and community reintegration. Pelican Bay remains one of the most infamous prisons in America, a place built to control, but one that sparked national debate about justice, punishment, and human rights. What do you think? Does solitary confinement keep us safer, or does it cross the line into cruelty? If you found this story insightful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more real stories from inside the world's toughest prisons.